as well.
Thank you.
Debbie, it's noon, but before we get started, could you text Member Norheim to see if he plans on attending,
Sure, I'll do so right now.
please? Then we'll just, as soon as you get that off, then we'll proceed.
And we do have the line of Chris Cotta, who just joined us on the presenter line as well.
Thank you.
Did you send out a message there, Debbie?
Yep, I did. I hit send, no response yet.
Okay, well, Jennifer, can you please start the countdown for our meeting?
Yes, absolutely. And just to let you know, we do have Bill Hofstetter, who was connected through to the presenter line.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And here we go. So 5, 4, 3.
Okay, we will call the meeting to order. Today is March 8th, 2021. It's a noon regular meeting of the Petersburg Borough Assembly. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Taylor?
Since we haven't heard from Member Norheim, we'll have to call it. Well, he just texted me and said he's going to call in, so he's absent until he calls him.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Continue, Clerk Thompson.
Jay?
Here.
Jeff?
Here.
Bob?
Here.
Dave?
Here.
Chelsea?
Here.
Mark?
Here. Okay, we have 6 assembly members today. Hoping Member Norheim will call in. That's now time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that brings us to approval of minutes. There are no minutes presented today for approval. That brings us on to item 4, amendment and approval of the meeting agenda presented today. I'd entertain a motion to approve as presented unless there are amendments.
Mr. Mayor?
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under Assembly discussion items, I'd like to have a discussion regarding our capital priority list that we turned into our congressional delegation a couple weeks ago. I'd also like to, under discussion, I'd like to talk about a letter of request that we had for an anti-discrimination ordinance to be put together for draft in the next meeting. And the last 2 things I had was emergency funding needs for child care and the community food bank in Petersburg. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Debbie, are you keeping track of these and then prompt me when we get to discussion items so far? Yes, Member Lim.
Yes.
Yes, I would like to, if I could, expand the one item that Member Mucci talked about, and that had to do with the items that we put on the CAPSIS list. And I particularly, if we could, if you yourself or the manager would give us an update as part of it on that Scal Bay project, I would definitely appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, you mean on the federal capital project list, not the CAPSIS that goes to the states?
Correct. I'm talking about the federal CAPSIS list, but that's part, I think, of where Member Mucci's at too. But I'd like to talk specifically about that Scal Bay project. Thank you.
Okay, so the clerk will have all these notes made. If there are no other amendments, since there's these, well, we can't amend and put action items on, so I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of proceeding as amended, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we will move forward as, with the amended agenda.
Mayor Jensen,
Public hearing. Yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that member Norheim is now on the line.
okay, perfect. We have a full assembly then. So that brings us to public hearings. There are no public hearings today. There are no bid awards. That brings us to item 7, which is persons to be heard related to items on today's agenda. Are there any people in the queue for that, Clerk Thompson?
Yes, Jen, if you could please unmute Stephanie Hayes.
The line is open.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very clear.
Great. This is Stephanie, and I'm speaking on behalf of Parks and Rec Committee, Advisory Committee as the Vice Chair regarding the Parks and Recreation user fee changes. During the last public committee meeting, we reviewed the Parks and Recreation user fee. And upon public feedback and suggestions proposed and discussed with Stephanie Payne, the committee unanimously approved the 4.60.020 Parks and Recreation Community Center user charges structure with the following amendment. Under 18, excuse me, under 18 or those under 18 with valid Petersburg student identification. This suggested amendment should have been provided to you by Debbie. It was created to include Petersburg High School students who are over age 18 or students who take time in high school. For example, there are local students who continue in the school system at the age of 19 based on when their birthday falls or on their academic progress. We do not want to financially punish students with valid standing in a local schools. The change was agreed upon with Stephanie Payne and passed unanimously by the advisory committee. We strongly urge you to listen to the community, the Parks and Recreation Director, and the advisory committee, the community and advisory committee regarding the user category of under 18 being amended to those under 18 or with valid Petersburg student identification. That is all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Clerk Thompson, would you please have the operator unmute the next caller?
Mayor Jensen, I do not see any other callers on the line.
Okay, well, that brings us to item 8, persons to be heard unrelated to items on today's agenda.
And again, we do not have any callers on the line, so I think we are good.
Okay, that moves us on to item 9, board, commission, and committee reports. There are none listed today. Consent agenda is item 10. There's nothing listed there. Item 11, report of other officers. There is a few people that would like to report there, and starting with the Emergency Operations Center report, and I believe that would be from Carl Hagerman.
Yes, hello, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Very clearly.
Great. Well, yeah, happy to provide a report to the Assembly today from the EOC. As you all know, I'm sure we've been in the midst of an outbreak of COVID-19 for the last couple weeks, and happy to report that we are seeming to be over the hump, so to speak. We topped out on active cases in Petersburg of 68 a few days ago. Excuse me. We have been seeing a steady drop in cases since that point. We had Friday, Saturday, and Sunday had no new cases show up. However, this morning we did get a report that there are two new cases so far today. So we're not completely out of the woods by any means, but the numbers do seem to be heading in the right direction and getting us out of this outbreak. it's important to note that, you know, the increased testing and isolation that has come about through the contact tracing is definitely working to isolate the virus and to allow it to fizzle out in our citizens that were infected. And you know, that I'd really want to thank all the individuals that took the quarantine and isolation seriously, and all the businesses that also responded to the elevated community risk level to red, to amend their business practices, their operations, or to simply close their doors for a limited amount of time to control and limit the spread of the virus. Those are the ways that we know are effective in addressing an outbreak like this and getting it under control again. So thanks very much to those people that approach it seriously and are getting us back in line. I wanted to mention that the community is still in the high risk status, the red color. We did have a risk assessment meeting this morning, and while the numbers are definitely heading in the right direction, the number of active cases is still fairly large. As of this moment, we still have 41 active cases in Petersburg, which is definitely down from our peak, but a long ways from being back to zero, where we enjoyed being much of the year last year. So that those numbers, in combination with a positivity percentage of tests still slightly above 3%, still indicates to the EOC that Petersburg is still in a high-risk category, and we are going to be watching the numbers and data very closely this week, but for the time being, the community should still be hyper-vigilant about maintaining protective and mitigation provisions so that we can get all the way through this outbreak. Also wanted to mention that in the legislature there is House Bill 76, which is trying to resurrect the statewide emergency declaration, and to that end, our hospital CEO Phil Hofstadter did testify to the House DHSS committee last week. Did a good job of identifying, you know, what our issue is in Petersburg at this time with the outbreak, and how the state declaration expiration has exacerbated that for us. I just wanted to note to the Assembly that I'll be sending just some emails to remind our representatives and our senator of the letter of support that the Assembly sent last month for extension of the emergency declaration, and hopefully we'll see some action on that. It does help us in Petersburg. Would have helped us more if that emergency declaration had not expired. We are dealing with an outbreak that could have been prevented and may have been prevented by not having a lapse in some of the protections that we had in place for a long time. Also wanted to mention that the vaccination, COVID-19 vaccination program in Petersburg is going strong. The hospital is doing just an outstanding job of maintaining a sign-up list and putting together the vaccination clinics with the assistance of the Parks and Rec Department and the community gym. It's so smooth, and so many people have just reported on a very positive experience as they're going through their vaccination, and we are seeing a good portion of Petersburg people being vaccinated, which is great. Definitely probably helped us in this outbreak situation. And for anybody that is 16 and older, the hospital is now encouraging anybody 16 and older to get on the waiting list. The vaccines are still flowing to Petersburg, and they are more than ready to administer vaccines to anybody that they can, anybody that chooses to receive the vaccine. And that would include the vaccines now include the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine, which I think they're anticipating being available for a clinic this Friday. So encourage anybody that's interested in being vaccinated to get on the waiting list. I think that comprises the bulk of the report, unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions of Mr. Hagerman today from the Assembly?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor? Yeah.
Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the report, Carl. I see at the next vaccine next weekend that there'll be, or this week that they're going to be doing the Johnson vaccine, like you mentioned. Is there any purpose of, if you've been vaccinated with the Moderna one, to additionally get the Johnson one, or once you're vaccinated, it doesn't make any difference? Thank you.
That, I haven't heard that question before, but I want to say if you've got one vaccination, then that's probably going to do you. The efficacy of each vaccine is different, but they all protect you from COVID-19. So if you've already received one of the other vaccines, I wouldn't plan on trying to double up on anything. In fact, I don't know that the hospital would allow that. In any case, I think if you received any vaccine, you're way ahead of the curve as far as protecting yourself from COVID-19.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you,
I have a question.
Carl. Member Tremblay.
Thank you. It's kind of a question, kind of more of a comment for you, Mr. Hagerman. It's regarding the updated CDC guidance out this morning. And I'd say it's more of a comment because, again, it just came out this morning. None of us get a sneak peek at what the CDC is up to until we all see it at the same time. But I'm interested in the idea of amending the travel mandate to try to give more flexibility to fully vaccinated individuals who are arriving into town. It sounds like they may not need that test immediately, but if we could amend our travel mandate to at least get people the testing vouchers so that they could come back easily to the testing site if they do develop symptoms. I don't know. Just kind of thinking out loud on that. I know it'd be nice to keep things moving a little more freely in town, and especially as we get close to summer, it would be quite lovely to incentivize responsibly vaccinated independent travelers coming to town. That would be a real boon for the local economy. So that's just my initial thoughts. Again, I know it just came out this morning, and it's almost like you have a few jobs already to do, not just keep up with CDC guidance, but since this is the time to comment on that, I just thought I'd plant that seed and see what comes from EOC discussions this week and see if it sparks anything with other Assembly members for us to talk about sometime.
Sure. Can I comment, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because yes, we are trying to digest the new guidelines from CDC today, and you're right, they did just come out this morning, and there's a fair amount of information there. One thing that I did see is that they did not change any of their guidance on travel, so I'll have to wade into that a little bit deeper to know, if our local mandates could be modified at all to account for vaccinated persons. It might be, definitely too early for me to say today what the impacts would be, but as I have more time to spend reading into that guidance, there may be some possibilities. We'll have to wait and see. It definitely, the CDC is moving towards the vein of promoting vaccination through guidance for our nation in treating the fully vaccinated people differently, basically because they do pose a lower risk for spread and for increased care at our hospitals. So it will be wading into that, as I said, and if there prudent actions need to be made, local mandates, we will certainly look at that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hagerman. If there are no other questions of Mr. Hagerman, we will move to the Petersburg Medical Center report from the CEO, Phil Hofstetter.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me okay?
Very clear.
All right. Just to build a little bit off Carl's report, obviously the primary focus in the last couple of weeks for the hospital has been mitigating the outbreak of COVID. A lot of our staff are working many hours with this response. So just to follow up, last Thursday I was invited to testify at the House HSS Committee in support of House Bill 76 and reported out on the outbreak here a bit in Petersburg. It's certainly clear from the outbreak that the lack of mitigation definitely contributes to the spread within the community. Public health has sourced it back to bars, restaurants, daycare, and schools, a lot of the congregate areas. So we certainly want to make sure that we're monitoring those. I think I would caution right now at not supporting testing. Testing is really our only method of tracking the virus, particularly with travelers coming in to Petersburg. I think it's a little bit soon, even with the vaccine. So I'd be in support of testing and continued testing until more information comes out with efficacy of transmission with some of the vaccines. In response to the outbreak, we stood up to free asymptomatic testing at the airport, and I want to thank the EOC for allowing that space for us. 7:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. daily. We'll have that throughout this week as well, and then we'll move that back to the respiratory clinic here at the hospital after the outbreak, as long as it continues to decrease. So we'll continue to offer free asymptomatic testing as we go forward. It's just will be here at the hospital again. We had our vaccine point of dispensing at the community gym on Friday for the second dose. That was about 400 people vaccinated. So we're upwards of, I believe, 1,000 people in the community are fully vaccinated probably in the next 2 weeks, and that's fantastic. We also have another vaccine pod this Friday. If you're interested and you're 16 and over, you would go to pmcak.org and sign up. I encourage everyone to sign up. As Carl mentioned, we'll have some limited supply of the J&J, Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And just to answer Assemblymember Mucci's, you can't mix and match vaccines. You have to stick with one vaccine per FDA. A few statistics on the outbreak. Since February 19th, we topped out at 68 cases, but we had 88 cumulative cases since the 19th. Prior to this outbreak, we had a total for the whole year of 49 in-town community cases. So it's, I think at one point we were fourth in the nation per capita for a hotspot with COVID. We did a total of 1,179 asymptomatic and symptomatic tests in the last 2 weeks. We had increase in severity. We had 4 inpatient stays for those sick enough to be admitted, or there were those with high risk. We administered 14 monoclonal antibody treatments. That's an emergency use authorization treatment supplied by the state to help keep people out of the hospital. Seems to be very effective. We also had home health monitoring folks in their home. We still have 11 folks that are monitoring for pretty significant COVID or at high risk. All in total, we spent approximately $250,000 towards this outbreak just in the last 2 weeks with staffing and testing And just for those that are out there, we didn't get 1 red cent from the government or federal or anything. So we're in the hole $250,000 just on this outbreak. That's all I got to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hofstadter, for your report. Are there any questions?
Yeah, if I can, Mr. Mayor.
Member Lynn.
Yeah, Phil, I've been reading in the state news about the fact that we don't have any kind of an emergency powers now through the state, that it possibly or could or will affect funding that possibly could come to the hospital. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's a lot of uncertainty around with the lack of the emergency declaration on a couple of things. One is the waivers. Telehealth is a waiver. The federal waivers for allowing the CMS, which regulates healthcare, had provided some waivers so we could operate and have a little more flexibility or a lot of flexibility in addressing access to care, and telehealth was one of those. Federal waivers also is related to funding. So any federal funding under the emergency declaration has at risk. We still don't know if we're ineligible for funding, but it certainly makes it harder if we're not in a state of or a declaration of emergency. From the state side, the supplies such as the testing kits that we received for those over 1,000 tests that we provide, a lot of those were in-house tests. We got those from the state. We got the monoclonal antibody, which is the treatment for COVID, that we also got that from the state. So the emergency declaration risks that from the state to be able to supply us with some of those treatments and some of the testing supplies, in addition to potential risk for funding.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hofstadter, for your report today. That brings us to Southeast Alaska
Mr. Mayor.
Power. Yes, is this, who, what
Member
assembly
Norheim.
member is that? Member Norheim.
Yeah, I had a question for Phil, and it was regarding if he, I guess I don't know how to phrase that. It would be that if he believes maybe that there wouldn't have been so many people with terrible symptoms if they had been taking more vitamin D. I'm just reading way too much stuff about how it's getting simply ignored as even a moderate precaution so that people won't get so sick. And I'm reading things in the health magazine now. I got the Journal of Medicine saying that this should be getting pushed more as just an easy thing so that people don't get so sick. Not saying don't get the vaccine. Never said that, never will. You absolutely should. But should people be trying to get outside or maybe take a supplement to, if they do get it, not get laid up in the hospital so bad?
Yeah, sir, I can answer that a little bit. So I think advocating for health and nutrition and vitamins are all things we'd want to do during any time, and I've always been a big advocate for that. The studies you're referencing, I believe, are specific to severe COVID, so those are cases that are in the hospital with mortality specifically. I believe that there was some correlation found with those that early on in the pandemic, especially where there was really low incidence of vitamin D and some correlation to death. But I don't believe there are any studies related to the severity of COVID, outside of the intensive care unit.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Member Lynn, that brings us to you on the report from Southeast Alaska Power Agency.
Hi, this is the operator. Debbie?
Oh, yeah, I am here. Sorry.
Our cable.
Our meeting is still going. I think I just lost connection for a second.
Pardon me, Debbie. Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Do you want me to place this line back through quickly?
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Perfect. You're welcome.
Can you hear me?
Sorry about that. Had a little disconnection going on there. I'm back.
Okay, so can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, just wanted to verify. Okay, Member Lynn.
Okay, thank you. I learned this morning that GCI has removed their cable that was overlaying our submarine cable and have relayed it in such a way that it will not interfere with ours in the future. So that's pretty good news. The replacement submarine cable is scheduled to be through production in Japan by the March 24th, and testing of that cable still will have to be done before shipment. On a very positive note on that, though, the cable is one piece, so there's no splices in it, which is significant from the standpoint that that reduces potential weak points on it. The board also approved contracts for brushing on the Swan-Bailey transmission line, and we did it also the Swan-Bailey transformer substation refurbishment. As a side note to that, I still get the cost of refurbishing some of these transformers and stuff still boggles my mind, but I understand what it is. Next, the board had a presentation and discussion on bonding of the submarine cable. And as I stated previously, having to pay up front for the cable takes all of our assets, approximately $14 million. And the board has previously given the CEO direction on the order to liquidate those financial assets as the bills come due. And as I said before, we can't even look at any kind of insurance reimbursement on it, which will be up no more than $5 million if we were even to get it. So everything has to be paid up front first. We spent quite a bit of time talking about bonding options, and we had a couple of different presentations on bonding, looking at when that could be done, possible potential rates. And I would think that we're probably looking at the Alaska Bond Bank. And my guess is that we'll have a special meeting somewhere between now and the next meeting to take a much more serious look at it and maybe even enter into some kind of an agreement. I want to say that our wholesale rate to our member communities has for some time been pretty low, and I am pretty doggone certain that we're going to have to raise rates. To replace that cable, just to give you an idea, is that our annual rate, I think, payback to the state in our borrowing will be somewhere between probably $700,000 to $1 million, and so there's no way that we can continue to maintain the rate at 6.8 cents. We're going to have to look at some kind of an increase here in the future. And with that, I'll open it up for any questions folks might have.
Are there any questions of Mr. Lynn from the Assembly?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Member Kinsinger.
Yes, Mr. Lynn, is the cost of replacing this cable entirely borne by the users in Petersburg Borough?
Not at all. And that's the value of having the SEPA organization. All costs are borne by the three communities, Ketchikan, Wrangell, and Petersburg. And so those rates, when we set them, whatever we do, affect all three communities simultaneously. And so having that agency is of great value, I think, to Petersburg and to the other communities for that matter, because it spreads the cost out over time. And it gives us greater ability for bonding across here southeast.
Thank
Any
you.
other
And
questions?
then, just a follow-up, Mr. Mayor. And then, Mr. Lynn, since the other cities will also likely, have to absorb some level of rate increase, how easy is that gonna be able to be passed? I know I'm asking you something you might not know the answer to.
You definitely are. We've had very long discussions about this between the three communities. And with COVID and so forth, we've put it off now for approximately a year. But I don't see the ability to put it off here another year. I think we're going to have to do something. The question goes back to something which I don't have answers for, is we've asked the CEO to take a look at different options. Could we go with, let's say, a fourth of a cent, a half a cent? What difference would it make? I can tell you that as a rule of thumb that you can look at, each half-cent increases brings back about $600,000 to $650,000 plus or minus in there. And so I think we would have to have at least a half a cent increase in order to just to pay debt on that bond.
Okay, does that answer
if I can, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, to follow up on that question, is that I'm pretty doggone sure that whatever rate we come up with, it'll get passed back, and it'll probably be later sometime this year. But the board has a lot of questions that they've asked for very detailed information on. So there's a long ways before we make a final decision, I think, on it.
Any other questions of Member Lynn on the SEPA presentation?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to Member Lynn, I guess, so that's just it's a decision that the board makes with the administration's input. Is that right, Bob? Thank you.
Yes, it is. Looking at all kinds of options. I know that our mayor and the other mayors, are very concerned about raising rates and how we do it and so forth. And that's part of the discussion that we're currently have to engage in down the road.
Thank you.
Well, actually, just to respond, anytime you raise rates, it's concerning, but for the bang for the buck that we've got out of 6.8 cents wholesale for 19 years or whatever it is unbelievable in itself. So, we'll just have to see what the SEPA board thinks we need to do to keep this operation fluent. So, if there's no other questions of Member Lynn, that brings us to Sea Otter Working Group presentation by Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last Thursday from 9 o'clock I had to leave at 11. I participated in a teleconference with I guess it's the Southeast. Well, it's just a Sea Otter Working Group, and it's got quite a large stakeholder group. Universities up and down the coast, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Fish and Game, University of Alaska, University of California, Santa Cruz, just kind of going over where they are and trying to find out what is next for all these groups. The thing I took away from it was that this coming summer they're going to be doing an aerial survey in Southeast Alaska to get a better understanding of how many otters are in Southeast. They've got new technology that will give them a real-time picture of the animals that are out there. I hope to have the list of attendees as well as some more notes, but they're not published yet. And as soon as I get them, I'll forward them to the Assembly and to whoever else wants them. But yeah, it's kind of informative. I think some discussion about 30,000 otters that might be in Southeast and how fast the group is growing. But yeah, it was very interesting, and I'll keep you posted as we go forward. So if there's any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that update, and it'll be interesting to see how things progress. Are there any questions from Assembly members? Okay, hearing none, that brings us on to the Mayor's report. First off, I'll start by I mentioned this before, but I will be gone on March 22nd and possibly not home till after the April 5th meeting. Those are, be gone for fishing. I will try to call in. Also, I'll be gone April 19th. I'll be traveling for personal reasons, but I will try to call in at all three of those meetings. And I should know a day in advance of my availability. I will let the clerk know so she could get a hold of the vice mayor or whoever else will be chairing the meetings. So with that being said, we have Alaska Natives Without Land legislation. Alaska federal delegation plans to reintroduce the landless native legislation soon. Mayor Jensen and Manager Giesbrook took part in a teleconference with representatives from other communities affected by the proposed legislation and with staff from Senator Murkowski's office. So a little report on that from Senator Murkowski's office. We had Annie Hopler, and she's the new Energy and Natural Resources person in Washington, D.C. Lila Kimball was on the call. She's the new state director for Senator Murkowski. Chris Griffin, and I'm not sure what his position was with the senator. From Wrangell, we had Mayor Steve Pazunka, Manager Lisa Von Bargen, Clerk Carol Rushmore. From Petersburg, it was Manager Giesbrook and myself, and our lobbyist Sebastian O'Kelly was there. He also represents Wrangell, and Sebastian O'Kelly is the one that organized this call. During the call, there was questions from Wrangell, and they have already had two work sessions similar to what we will have Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. just to gather questions, and we're not going to provide answers specifically, but we will get the questions to the proper people to hopefully provide those answers. Wrangell had a couple questions of land conveyed if it happens that is within their, if it is within their borough. Can they, do they have plating and zoning authority on that land? So I thought that was an interesting question. And if it's similar to the Gold Belt land in our borough, once it's conveyed to us, or maybe even at this time, can you charge sales tax on activities that generate income? Annie Hopler mentioned to Murkowski that they need to do more homework and get some public input, and that is why I'm basically asked for this work session on Wednesday evening. If we don't take any kind of a position or give any kind of an opinion, then they're going to assume that everything is, you know, just there's no complaints. If complaint is the right word. And in the real world, all the issues would be addressed before legislation is introduced. So I asked the question, what is the time frame? This year, for sure, is when they intend to, possibly late May or early June. So I thought it was kind of important to start the public discussion. And that was pretty much the meeting, and it was just the general conversation there. And like I was mentioning, we'll hold a work session on Wednesday, March 10th at 6 p.m. It'll be via teleconference to receive public comments regarding the proposed legislation. You could also email comments to the borough clerk. A copy of the Senate bill which was introduced last session, 116th Congress, and the maps are on our website. So there's 5 communities, Haines, Ketchikan, Petersburg, Tenakee, and Wrangell, that are involved in this legislation. So we will see how things progress, but at some point, you know, there's going to be, I think it's going to be more than one meeting to gather information, and then at some point, if the assembly is going to take action on it, then it'll be during a regular meeting. And another teleconference or Zoom meeting that the manager and I were involved in was with Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, and this was on the water quality testing performed in 2020 It was on 16 ports and harbors from Ketchikan to Nome, and 20 sampling sites along the major southeast shipping and traffic lanes. And up till that Zoom meeting about 3 weeks ago, I was under the impression that they did not do any sampling in these traffic lanes, but I was mistaken, and they did. There's a map attached to this meeting agenda in the mayor's report or on our borough website that shows the 20 places they sampled. It's from Upper Lynn Canal to down around Ketchikan, Sumner Straits, Frederick Sound, etc. So that was kind of reassuring. They plan on doing more testing this coming summer, and hopefully they can continue the testing when there's more traffic from cruise ships. One thing the gentleman said was if they do away with the Ocean Ranger program or if it stays gone, all vessels, and I think it was over a certain carrying capacity, and I'm not sure if it was 50 or 250, maybe the manager can remember that number, but they will get an on-site inspection before the season. Then during the season, they will get scheduled, planned inspections, and potentially inspections that are unannounced. So we'll see how that continues. But at least they're doing something. So, seeking letters of interest. The Assembly is seeking letters of interest from borough residents who wish to serve the community by filling a vacant seat on the following boards and commissions until the October 2021 municipal election. The Planning Commission, there's 1 vacant seat. Public Safety Advisory Board, there are still 2 vacant seats. And letters of interest should be submitted to Clerk Thompson at the Borough office located at 12 South Nordic Drive by mailing to Box 329, Petersburg, Alaska 99833, or emailing to dthompson@petersburgak.gov. So that pretty much concludes my mayor's report. If there are any questions, I will try to answer them.
Yeah, if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Member Lim.
Yeah, was in your discussions relative to the water quality testing, did the issues of testing on the Stikine, the Iskut, and some of the other rivers come up at all?
No, I think that's a totally different endeavor, and that I can't remember the name of the group right off the top of my head, but Salmon Beyond Borders or Rivers, Rivers Without Borders. It's
yes.
That group, I believe, has done some water sampling, but I'm not sure of the extent of it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm aware they have. That they've tested it, but also heard that they were not going to continue that because of no federal funds. I'm not sure exactly what. Well, I was just wondering if there was any discussion in your call about that particular issue. Thank you.
Not with DEC from Alaska. No, there wasn't. Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit more when we're talking about the discussion item about the work session. But was there anybody else there at the meeting regarding the land list? Was there anybody from the Sea Alaska Corporation on the teleconference?
No, just the people that I listed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Member Norheim.
It's more of a comment. I just would like to let you know that I won't be able to make it to that meeting. I will be out crabbing on the 10th. And also, I really like these water sampling spots they did there. It looks like they hit all the mixing zones. It's exactly where we wanted them to go in the first place. And I'm just really glad they went out and did that. I was disheartened when I thought that they only did the harbors.
Yeah, it was my sentiment as well on the water testing. And the meeting, it's just a work session on Wednesday the 10th. It's not necessary for Assembly members to attend. It's just going to be by teleconference, and any people that want to put forward a comment will have 5 minutes to send it, to state their comment or send an email. So we'll play it by ear from there. So if there's no other questions, we'll turn it over to the manager for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Residents may still obtain up to 10 buckets of traction sand from Public Works free of charge. However, the office is closed, so we would like you to call ahead and call Public Works before you show up in the yard. We've engaged with local engineering firm Harai and Associates to provide some stamp design drawings for the culvert replacement and embankment repairs at the Public Works job site. We have applied for FEMA disaster relief funding, and having this project engineered will increase the borough's chance of obtaining the funding and facilitate bidding out the work. We've had the street crew cleaning out the motor pool of all, stuff to get it out of the way in anticipation of the upcoming repairs to the structure. We did have some engineering issues that have slowed the planned procurement of some additional roll-off dumpsters. We hope to have these issues sorted out soon and have some 15-yard containers available for use during the summer season. These are used a lot on construction job sites. All Public Works departments were impacted by the recent COVID-19 outbreak, either directly or indirectly. We had some department staff that were off work or on modified schedules, and the Public Works office is going to remain closed to walk-in traffic until our community risk level decreases. Visitation in assisted living was stopped as of February 22nd and will resume when we are out of red. Please call Sheilyn at 772-2445 or 518-0528 with any questions. Only essential workers are being allowed in at this time. We are continuing to do daily screening of employees, including temperature checks, daily questionnaire, strict sick leave policy, diligent hand washing, and sanitizing high-touch areas multiple times a day at that facility. We continue to take daily temps on all the residents and monitor for any signs of illness. We had a main water valve had to shut off when it failed at elderly housing. Happened a couple of weeks ago, and Brian Haley worked with Public Works to get that valve replaced. Just thanks for him. Liz attended portions of the Southeast Conference Mid-Session Summit and the Alaska Chapter of Planning Association's virtual conference. And our online property viewer has been updated to show current year assessed values and ownership. So check it out if you're interested in all that. Community Development is working with the State Fire Marshal to reconcile differences in local versus state snow load requirements for commercial and industrial development. We run into this occasionally where the State Fire Marshal wants us to meet snow load levels that are more appropriate for Anchorage and places north, and we're trying to get them convinced that we don't get that kind of snow load here, which would help people when they're building homes and businesses. The NOAA CARES Act Fisheries Assistance is accepting applications from Alaskan commercial harvesters, sport fishing charter operators, and seafood processors through April 23rd, 2021. Applications and more information at psmfc.org or call 1-888-517-7262. The library is working with Siemens to establish a remote connection to our mechanical system. This will help with troubleshooting and preemptively solving problems that come up with the mechanical systems at the library. Thanks to First Bank, who gave a $3,000 grant to the library for the youth summer program, Summer Stream. Transfer switch controls for the water plant standby generator have been installed and are being fine-tuned for proper operation, and staff plans to commence a large project of cleaning the exterior of our water storage tank when the weather gets a little better. Wastewater staff has been performing maintenance and repairs for a failed breaker at Pump Station 4 and a temperamental SCADA radio at Scow Bay Pump Station 1. SCADA controls are especially important in wastewater and helping us turn pumps on and off and keeping an eye on what's happening. Harai and Associates has produced the first draft for design of a sewer main and manhole replacement on Ira 2 Street. Rock and Road plans to begin work on the Scow Bay Pump Station number 1 in mid-March, weather depending. The mechanic and electrician recently worked on repair of a bad coolant heater at the Scow Bay generator. The mechanic also successfully replaced the oil scavenging pump in the 21 generator. This failure was caused by a bad rebuild at the parts supplier's shop. replacement pump was supplied under warranty to Power and Light. The line crew and electrician operator responded to an outage on February 27th. The circuit from Scow Bay substation to Blind Slough was out for about 90 minutes as the line crew cut snow-laden trees out of the line. Similar incidents occurred in both Ketchikan and Wrangell in the week before Petersburg's heavy snow event. Power and Light appreciates the patience of our customers during the outage. Let's see, CPER, I think Bob covered this already, but GCI has moved their fiber optic cable, and GCI work was scheduled to begin this week, and it sounds like they got it done early. Property assessment notices were mailed on Monday, March 31st. Property owners have 1 month to appeal. Forms can be found online. Congratulations to Josh, who has received his EMS instructor certification. And Search and Rescue had a call out for a missing individual. A person was found before the full STAR team activation. Contractors for the permanent pool repairs canceled their trip to Petersburg due to the red status. All of us involved in the process agreed this was the right decision. I will reschedule them when we get back to orange status, and which will be, let's hope, for a couple weeks from now. And Tara continues to work on our new Borough website, and Debbie and Becky are working with MuniCode on our new meeting agenda software. And that's it for this, if you have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giesbrecht. Is there any questions of the manager on his report? Okay, hearing none, that'll bring us to the next item on today's agenda, which is 14, unfinished business. Only one item there today, and it's a third and final reading for ordinance 2021-03, an ordinance amending chapter 4.60, Parks and Recreation User Fees of the Borough Code to update user fees for the community center. I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its third and final reading.
So moved. So moved.
Okay, I'll take one of those motions. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Discussion on ordinance 2021-03. Earlier in the meeting, we had a comment from Stephanie Hayes, the vice chair of the Public Parks and Rec Advisory Board. So,
Mr. Mayor?
Remind me of that. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make an amendment to this ordinance. And it would be to remove on the last page there, on page 10, remove under member fees, remove the words under 18, and replace under 18 with the words those under 18 or with valid Petersburg student identification. Thank you.
Is there a second to that amendment?
Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Member Mucci for an amendment and seconded by Member Tremblay. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Hearing none, will the clerk call a roll on the amendment?
Bob?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Okay, that amendment passes unanimously, so that language will be changed. And then that brings us back to the main motion as amended. Any discussion on the main motion as amended? Will the clerk call the roll?
Jeff?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, if that ordinance 2021-03 passes unanimously in its third and final reading as amended. That brings us to the next item, and it's a resolution, Resolution 2021-03. This is a resolution authorizing the Borough to apply for and accept COVID grant funding from the state of Alaska, Department of Health and Social Services for COVID testing and vaccine administration costs. I'd entertain a motion to approve this resolution.
Mayor Jensen, we actually missed an ordinance there.
Oh, I did. Let me back up. Okay. We're under new business, first item. Yeah, don't skip that one. Thank you. Well, why don't we jump back to that since we're already in the resolution? We have a motion and a second. And so is there any discussion on the resolution 2021-03? And then we'll back up to ordinance 2021-04.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just curious if we could maybe just get an explanation. I think Phil touched on this earlier today, or this afternoon. Do we need any more clarification, or are we all happy with what we've heard?
If you're asked, if you need some more clarification, that's fine. I think it's clear to me anyway what we're asking for here.
No, I'm fine. Just checking. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other discussion on resolution 2021-03, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Dave?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, resolution 2021-03 passes unanimously, and we'll back up in the agenda here. Thank you, Clerk Thompson, for catching my missing this one here. So it's an ordinance 2021-04. This is an ordinance amending chapter 3.76, administrative officers and appeals process of the Borough Code to update the list of administrative officers to include the registered nurse contracted for Mountain View Manor Assisted Living, and to update the title of the Mountain View Manor Director position. I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor?
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just maybe a brief description from somebody telling the folks at home what we're up to here. Thank you.
Manager Giesbrecht, would that be you, or is Sheila in the audience, or who could?
Well, this is probably me, and then Debbie can fill in when I miss, if that works.
That's fine.
Okay. Basically, this is a little bit of cleanup. We have a section in our ordinances that talks about those employees that work on a contract basis, rather than, hourly in a sense. And we noticed that the nurse in particular was missing from this. Doesn't change anything in the position or her pay, just confirms what we've already been doing for a very long time anyway. And then a title correction on the manor directors. So it's really no fiscal impact, just a kind of housekeeping.
Okay, thank you. Is that a clear explanation for everybody? It sounds like it. If there's no other discussion on ordinance 2021-04, I'd ask the clerk to call the roll.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, ordinance 2021-04 passes unanimously in its first reading. That brings us to item C under new business. Borough comments to DNR's preliminary decision regarding Petersburg Borough municipal land selections. The comment deadline for DNR's preliminary decision regarding Petersburg Borough's municipal land selections is March 12th, 2021. Community and Economic Director Cabrera has drafted a response to the preliminary decision for the Assembly to approve or amend. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the letter by Ms. Cabrera.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Lynn. Is there any discussion?
If I could, Mr. Mayor?
Member Lynn.
Yeah, I first of all, I thank Liz. There is a tremendous amount of work in going through all those right-of-ways and everything else and on the books, so I appreciate that. I'd like to specifically talk about two parts, and one's the Olson's logged up, and the other one is the Woodpecker site. Liz, I believe Liz has put in there, she highlighted those two areas for us. I really like her language where that I really believe we ought to continue to apply for those, and I have no problem with the language that she's suggesting that they go ahead and make that a public right of way on Olson's. On the other ones, I totally agree with her on still continuing to try to take the lot to the side because it has no effect on what they want to do. So I appreciate that her comments on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that input, Member Lynn. Any other discussion on the correspondence that Ms. Cabrera has drafted for us to approve or amend to DNR? Will the clerk call the roll?
Jeff?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that passes unanimously, response to DNR. Next item, D, fiscal year 2022 budget policy. I'd entertain a motion to approve this policy as presented. It was presented to us by Member Giesbrick, or Manager Giesbrick, and Finance Director Tao. And they presented a draft budget policy for this upcoming year, 2022. So I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Can I have one question of either Jody, if she's there, or the manager? Is there any major changes for the policies for this year versus the last set of policies?
This is Jody. I could answer that, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Item C talks about taking half of last year's surplus and putting it into the property development fund, and that would be approximately $669,000. And then the other major change that we had in this was to take the fisheries business tax that we get annually, and instead of the general fund taking the first $300,000 or $350,000 and the remainder going to the harbor this next year, we would split it 50-50, the general fund and the harbor, just because we know it's going to be a low year, and we want the harbor to be able to get some of the funding.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sure.
Is there any other questions or any other discussion on this budget policy?
Yes, Mr. Mayor?
Member Kinsinger?
Yes, I appreciate Mrs. Tao's explanation she gave, I was kind of confused about it, and she walked me through it, and I found it very clear, and I really like that we're splitting the fish tax with the harbor this year because of the low amount of fish tax dollars that we're receiving. So I commend her for a job well done. I thought it was a very good document.
Okay, thank you. And Member Tremblay, did you have a comment?
Yeah, it was actually very similar to Assemblymember Kinzinger's comments, just thanking Jody for the sound fiscal management she brings to this. As we heard from the recent audit, we are in, and many communities would be envious of the position we find ourselves in. So it makes going into difficult budget times a little bit easier to have such solid backing and reasoning going forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other discussion on this budget policy presented by Manager Giesbrecht and Finance Director Tao? Hearing none, will the clerk call the roll or take the vote?
Taylor?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the budget policy is approved as presented. That brings us to letter E under new business. And this is a letter of support for WAVE's OVW grant application. WAVE is applying for a transitional housing assistance grant for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking offered by the Office of Violence Against Women through the Department of Justice. A letter of support for WAVE's grant application has been drafted for the Assembly's consideration. I'd entertain a motion to approve the letter.
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on this letter?
Mr. Mayor?
Member Tremblay.
Thank you. I'm in strong support of this. It's a need in our community, and I hope that this would help. So.
Are you still there?
Yeah, sorry. So I hope we vote to support it today. Sorry about that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other discussion on this approval of this letter for WAVE for their grant application? Hearing none, will the clerk call the roll?
Jay?
Yes.
Taylor?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
And Dave?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we have unanimously approved the letter for WAVE for their grant application. Brings us to item 16, which is communications. There were 20 letters submitted between the last meeting and today's meeting. They're all on our website if people are interested in reading them. Are there any other communications that Assembly members would like to add at this time?
Mr. Mayor?
Member Mucci.
Yeah, I just wanted just a clarification that we have received a couple of letters in the last couple of days that aren't in this packet, so just for the folks at home. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and after the deadline for the meeting agenda, they will be posted on the next meeting agenda, I would believe. So if I'm not hearing any other Assembly members want to add any communications they've received, so that brings us to Assembly discussion items, and I believe there was like 4 or 5 additions, but we will start with what is presented to us on the agenda. That's item A, Unrecognized Southeast Alaska Native Communities Recognition and Compensation Act. Member Mucci, you asked to have this on the agenda, so you start off.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, this is, this process here, I understand it's kind of clunky. we're gonna have a work session in a couple of days, or I guess it's not really a work session, it's just more of an opportunity for the public to weigh in on legislation that hasn't been introduced yet. The legislation that was introduced last year and didn't make it as far as people would like it to. There was lots of concerns with that legislation, from a lot of people that we heard from when we had, I don't know if it was a community meeting, but we had a lot of public testimony. I mean, for me, before any new legislation comes out of the senator's office, I mean, I think we should at least have some of the concerns that we had addressed, whether it has to do with easement, where the land selections were, turning over recreational cabins on the Tongass, as well as taxpayer-funded program roads and log transfer facilities that taxpayers paid for. People had some concerns about the property selections over at Thomas Bay and Point Agassiz, and I mean, we know what those concerns were. I mean, we heard from our federal lobbyist whenever we talked about this before, while that legislation was moving through Congress back in October whenever, that this is the opportunity to kind of pick the pieces. If we didn't like a piece that was selected, maybe offering up some other ideas for land selection. I'm not sure we have the staff or the or time to come up with new pieces of property. I expect that we're going to have some type of work session when some legislation comes out, and eventually the borough's going to be asked to weigh in on it. But I can listen into the meeting on Wednesday, but honestly, if there's old legislation out there, and that old legislation and those maps that were used in the past are going to be used for the new legislation that's coming out in May and June, where everybody's going to be really busy, I hope. I think it seems like we're putting the cart before the horse. I'm just not sure if you're going to get your best testimony this coming Wednesday. So, yeah, I'd like to hear what other people have to say. Thank you.
Well, I can respond to that. I think this is the start. Remember, Michi, I know the legislation didn't pass the 116th Congress. We were told it's going to be reintroduced potentially by early June, and our lobbyist recommended that we come up with some kind of a position or not. That's our choice. But this is the start of gathering official public comment, and the way I understand it, the way it stands now, is the legislation and the maps will be reintroduced potentially just like they are if there is no objection. So the maps are not set in stone, the wording in the legislation is not set in stone, and you're right, it hasn't been reintroduced, so it is kind of, but the document we would be working off, people should be working off of, in my understanding, is what was introduced last year. So, and no, we're not going to have a back and forth and answer questions at this point. At some point, we'll digest the input we get, emails and phone calls on Wednesday, and figure out how to proceed from there. That's why I kind of wanted to just get the ball rolling down the road so we could start gathering information from concerned people. So, any other discussion on this matter?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Member Norheim.
Just because I think we've beat this one to death for a while. Just a little bit of new information. It's probably not new to some people, but I just would like to throw out there that, well, obviously I support this. I would just like people to know that, yes, maybe you want the federal government to own this land still and keep it public, although the tribe has said that they're not going to keep people off the land, that over 1/3 of all federal land in the United States of America is in Alaska. That's a lot of land. And I don't see a real problem with putting a little more land out of the federal government's control and into the hands of well, let's just say the people who were here first. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other, input on this discussion item? Okay, and we will see what kind of a response we get at the, I guess the language could have been different and not called it a work session, but an information gathering, call or whatever you want to name it, but, that's what we called it, so. If there's no other discussion, that'll bring us to the item that was added to the, discussion list, and I think there's a federal projects list. Is that the first one, Clerk Thompson, that was added by Member Mucci?
Yes, that's how I have it written down, Mayor Jensen.
Okay, Member Mucci, your thoughts on this discussion item?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of weeks ago, or a meeting or two ago, we passed off our federal priorities for fiscal year 2020 off to our congressional delegation. And while there are some, well-needed things on this list, I think we need to have a conversation or a work session to talk about this list of needs. And the reason I bring this up is that, under healthcare, there's a total cost of renovation and replacement, or replacing the Petersburg Medical Center for a total cost of $84 million. Now, I know there's been some discussion about, whether we want this or we don't want this, and it's just on the list. Below that, there's the final planning and project design to make the project shovel-ready for, I think, 16.2. But one of the conversations I had last week is that, well, okay, if there seems to be some money floating out there as they work on getting monies to communities, whether it's whatever kind of funding mechanism, if there's $40 or $50 million that happens to come out and for healthcare and it gets into this district, we've identified a new hospital. I don't think anybody thinks we're going to renovate it, but we've identified a new hospital as our number one priority there for healthcare concerns. And I just want, I don't think I gave it enough, or maybe I misinterpreted my thoughts on it, but I don't think we gave it enough conversation that, okay, we're headed this way. I'd like to have more conversation with the hospital board about exactly what they're thinking about this process, so that if this is the borough's number one priority in healthcare, then we'd all better get on board with it and support it. I'm not there yet. It's going to be a tough sell, selling the $84 million facility here in town. I need to know some more information, and it has nothing to do with anything that's going on now. It's just that this is a big ticket item, and I don't know how we're going to pay for things like this. But I just wanted to maybe put this on the agenda for the next meeting that we have, just so that we could kind of go over this list and make sure that that's like our one of our number one priorities, so that the community knows that we just didn't send this off and it's up there waiting for some funding, and I'm not ready to support it at this point. So I just wanted to get it out there, have a little discussion about it today. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other input on this discussion item on our federal capital project list?
Yeah,
Member Lynn.
Mr. Mayor, if I might. Yes, if Member Mucci would, I'm in the process working with Mr. Hofstadter to work up some kind of a work session with the hospital and hospital board. If you could hold off for just a little bit, give us a few weeks to get things organized, I would appreciate it. And on this subject.
Okay, is there any other assembly members that have input on our federal priority list that haven't spoken? Okay, I guess we'll see where this discussion goes from here on that topic. The next item, Clerk Thompson, is in regards to a letter we received about a discrimination ordinance. Is that the next one that you have on your list?
It is, Mayor Jensen, yes.
Okay, Member Mucci, you wanted to talk about this?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we received a letter and a comment or two this weekend about possibly putting together an anti-discrimination ordinance to have on the borough books, and I'm hoping to work with a couple of individuals to have a draft ordinance at the next meeting, something that we can work on with other organizations in town, but seems like it would be a good thing to do in a community that has lots of different ideas about stuff, and some of the folks that sent me the letter are pretty fired up about moving forward with it, so I'm hoping to have it on the agenda for the next meeting. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, well, Member Tremblay.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought I'd add my comments that I wrote back to the petitioner on this topic. So for those listening at home, it was something that came in before the deadline for this meeting, so the text isn't in the agenda for today. The proposed language was, all people in the Petersburg Borough shall be entitled to full and equal enjoyment of public areas and businesses. No business or entity operating within the Petersburg Borough shall discriminate or segregate people based on race, ethnicity, religion, medical or gender status when rendering services or the sale of goods or employment within the Petersburg Borough. So that's just for clarification, and those are federally and state protected categories. In my response, I said that I've considered something like this, except that my version would expand to sexual orientation and gender identity, given that those are actually standards of population right now that are not protected by codified federal and state law. There was a decision this last year where Justice Gorsuch, who wrote the decision, they ruled that sex discrimination applied to gay and transgender workers, but it's not kind of a full comprehensive extension of those rights. So I kind of wrote back about how, I've weighed this. We have a small but mighty LGBTQ plus population, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and kind of et cetera, umbrella term in the community. But personally, I've weighed bringing it up with, it is a small community with many mighty allies, but I'm not sure what the community conversation around that would be like. I watched the conversation in Ketchikan this summer. It was rather contentious, and so that's kind of where it's just been stewing in my brain for a while. I wasn't sure if it was worth stirring things up when so much of that in hiring, housing, all that kind of stuff in this community is very word of mouth, very informal, very difficult to prove situations of discrimination without hard proof. And I worried that it would provoke, kind of stir the pot for folks who may already be in slightly vulnerable positions without the full knowledge that it would get support of the assembly and kind of make it all worthwhile. So that's kind of what was in my mind when this came up, because for me, I don't see the point in amending Borough Code to something that is already protected under state and federal law. It would be kind of symbolic, and the goal of these ordinances and of this protection for me is to actually do its job of expanding rights to all who need it. And so, so for me, it would need to be fully inclusive in order for it to be worth it as an assembly. And I guess I'm open to having that discussion if others are too. I'm open to hearing what members of the public have to say, and hopefully we could all be respectful of each other as we have that dialogue. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Any other assembly members have input on this discussion item?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I might.
Member Lynn.
In 2006, when we wrote the charter for this borough, if you'll go back to the preamble, we've had discussions along these lines. The preamble to the charter was specifically to address many of the issues which have been brought up. And it was more on a generic sense because we couldn't agree on some of the specifics as Member Tremblay talked about. But I think it covers many of the things that you talked about. And I would suggest you go back and look at what has been put into the charter in the preamble and already in the charter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that input. Any other assembly members have any input on this discussion item? Okay, we'll see where it goes from here. And what was the next one, Clerk Thompson, that Member Mucci wanted to add? I'm not sure of it. Something.
I wrote down funding needs for daycare/food, but maybe Member Mucci can clarify for us.
Food support or something like that, yeah. So Member Mucci, you want to talk to these discussion items?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's been brought to my attention that there's a crisis in the child care needs in the community here, as well as food needs for the community. You know, towards the end of the last year, we rolled in about $540,000 into the general fund from money that we didn't spend on programs that we received from the federal government. And I'm working with a couple of groups to try and figure out if there's some type of a similar program that we had last fall that had kind of a scholarship program for the child care needs in the community, where kids who needed or families who needed assistance for daycare needs, whether they're private daycare needs or nonprofit, had some funding available. Also, there's quite a bit of need for a community. I don't know if the word's food bank, and I know the Salvation Army does a lot of that, but you know, try and sort out if there's a way to get some of this funding into the community for food needs. I just wanted to get it out there that hopefully that between now and the next meeting I'll have some type of plan in place that the Assembly can kind of look at and chew on to try and meet some of these demands in the community. You know, ever since this pandemic started, it's really been an eye-opening experience for me to really see how we can't do without child care needs. Child care and the schools. They are the keystone component of this community, and if we don't have, you know, a stable child care facilities, whether they're private and nonprofit, and the schools open, we can't get the businesses open in this community. And I'm going to continue to push to see some type of child care assistance here at the next meeting, whether it's a supplemental budget or just a move money from one place to another, just to kind of make sure that the kids in this town are taken care of. So I'll have that at the next meeting. So thank you.
You might be muted, Mayor Jensen.
Oh, maybe I am muted. Any other input from Assembly members on those two discussion items? Okay, then we'll move on to, I believe Member Lynn wanted to add a discussion item to talk about the Scow Bay turnaround.
Yes, the Scow Bay project. Yes, I did. Thank you. At your last economic development meeting, there was some discussion on the Scow Bay project. Can you give us a little bit of information on where you came out? Was there any other decisions made on it? And then I got some comments. Thank you.
I don't know that there was any decisions made. It was about property acquisition and, you know, trying to acquire more land from the state. But, you know, I can't think off the top of my head any decisions or any directions that we took. If Liz is on the line, she could add to this or answer your questions maybe, or Manager Giesbrecht, he attended the meeting as well. Anybody have any answers to Member Lynn's questions?
I'm on the line, Mr. Mayor. I could answer that.
Okay,
sure,
thank
please.
you.
Sure. The project is still in design phase, and we have recently received 35% design from P&D Engineering, which is the firm that we've been working with. And so it was mostly an update to the members of the PEDC, and then also letting them know that we'd be doing a follow-up with P&D just to go through their 35% design and make some additional comments if necessary to finalize that. P&D has also completed all of the drafts of all the environmental permits required for that project. So really it's letting everyone know that it is at a true shovel-ready status. So if funding became available either at the federal level or at the state level, the project is well positioned to apply for that. And then we did have a little bit of discussion on the surrounding property. A portion of it in that turnaround area is owned by the state of Alaska. They use it for Department of Transportation maintenance shop. There has been ongoing interest to acquire that. The state recently invested a significant amount of money in developing a new warehouse there. That maybe makes it more challenging in the near term to acquire that property, but it's certainly something that could be a long-term goal. And I think that was all of the issues that we touched on.
Does that clarify what we talked about, Member Lynn?
Yeah, that helps. After our last meeting, if I might, I went back and pulled the preliminary drawings that were presented to the Assembly probably a couple of years ago now on this project. And if you remember last meeting, that we all unanimously agreed to increase the lease space that one individual wanted out there. It makes a lot of sense why he wanted it. And when I looked at the preliminary drawings, it appears to me that what's in those drawings is not the lots or the sizes of them aren't adequate from what we're hearing and what we heard on this latest lease, which is interesting. And my second comment is after I got to looking at it, is that there probably needs to be some kind of a discussion amongst the PEDC about the warehouse that we have there, the place we have there for our fire group. It appears to me that we have a great big conflict coming, because as soon as even part of that gets developed, there's a conflict of interest there, and there's a strong need for that, for a place to put fire equipment and so forth. But I think as a project, somewhere down the road, we've got to put that on our books if we're going to move it, if we're going to do this project. And I think there has to be some discussion along those lines. The last one I go with, it looks to me like after looking at it, there probably needs to be some discussion about a progression. I really like the idea of developing businesses out there, and we've done some, and we need to keep those. But I think we could do that, prior to the time we got the money to do the other. But there needs to be some kind of phasing or some kind of a thought process, I believe, of how we're going to proceed. And I think that would be some good discussion items. Anyhow, that was my thinking on it. Thank you.
Okay, Liz, can you respond to that? Is there any kind of I don't know, for the lack of the right terms, like a flow chart or a progress on the project? I thought at one time we were talking about potentially phasing different parts of it in, like the washdown pad and new ramp, et cetera. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it certainly is all driven by funding, Mr. Mayor. And so if we were looking at phasing, it's certainly phasing, because of funding pieces coming in at different times. And more recently, we've been pursuing federal funding that actually would cover the whole project, for a haul out. And so we haven't really talked about phasing it in the recent period. So while we continue to pursue that, we could look at phasing in different aspects of it. But I think, given the choice, I would still pursue, full funding of it, because it certainly makes it a lot more manageable and complete, and more certainty for the people that are investing out there. I will look into what Mr. Assembly Member Lynn said about the size of the parcels for the work sites, and those were just put down as templates, but we certainly want to make sure that those are adequate in size. And I know the fire marshal has come back with very specific requirements that we hadn't really seen before. So because we hadn't had a real building constructed out there, but now that we saw that, we might need to relook at that. So that's certainly a comment that we'll consider. And then as far as the fire hall, I think, that certainly has been discussed. Whether we want to tackle it sooner or later, I guess that's the question, and that's, partially a borough question too. We know that area is constrained for space, and eventually there's going to be more and more demand for space, especially once it's developed. I would expect that, and I would hope that. And what we're going to do with the fire hall is a good question, and certainly it needs to be maintained. So that is another valid question that is another issue with that project. So, I mean, I take Assembly members' comments to heart, and those are issues that can't be ignored, but certainly the project is still a work in progress. So.
Okay,
that's
thank
all I
you.
would say.
Thank you. Member Lynn, does that?
It does, Mr. Mayor, and I thank you for. There is questions there, and I also have a question. A rhetorical question, more or less, is where does the responsibility, for instance, lie to get something started related to the fire part of that, or let's say, does the borough have final say over the parts of that and the phasing of it, or I'm not at all clear on where the different responsibilities lie here. So, but I don't expect that to be answered today. It's just a question of mine.
It's food for thought, that's for sure. Okay, with that, is there any other comments on that discussion item? If there isn't, those are the only discussion items that I have notes made of for agenda change. So we will move on to Assembly member comments. Any Assembly members have comments they would like to put forward today? Okay, hearing none. Recognitions. Are there any recognitions today by Assembly members or staff?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I might.
Member Stanton Greger.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, during this recent COVID outbreak, I just wanted to take time to thank all members of the Petersburg Medical Center, hospital, clinic, etc., just for their tireless efforts trying to work to keep our community members as healthy as possible. I can't imagine the strain and effort that's been for everybody on all levels of the staff there. So I just wanted to publicly thank them for doing their best for all of us. And my words don't go far enough to expressing that, but I want to make sure it got said anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other recognitions today by Assembly members or staff? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.